this is the 1999 Impreza, my brother's, and this is currently running Eaton M62 supercharger that was originally from a Mercedes, and he kind of quickly mocked it up during the COVID lockdown, just kind of as a test to see. First was making this bracket to see if he could get the supercharger lined up with the belt system without removing the AC compressor or power steering or anything like that. So he got it mocked up. That's his lovely welding job that everyone makes fun of when they see this. But the issue was there was no material in that area. There was a big gap because he was trying to find the proper angles for the tubing and for the inlet. So that was just kind of a dirty mock-up before we fabricate an actual nice inlet and outlet on that supercharger. So a lot of people, in order to increase the boost on these, replace these pulleys, but we kind of need to keep the electromagnetic clutch on that pulley. So he ordered a custom crankshaft pulley, which I will show here. And this pulley so here it is. So here's the custom crankshaft pulley, and I will compare it to the OEM pulley. But what you'll see from the OEM pulley, inner and this outer diameter are the same on the OEM pulley. This band here is the one that will actually drive the supercharger and overdrive it, and hopefully resulting in a couple more pounds of boost. So this is the OEM pulley, and you can see it's a consistent diameter for the two belts, the inner and the outer belt. And here is what we're going to replace it with. So just you can see that the diameter of this side of the pulley kind of matches the OEM diameter. The other half is significantly larger to overdrive the supercharger. So we'll be installing this, rerouting the belts, putting on a slightly larger belt to compensate for the larger diameter, making sure it clears all the different brackets and everything, and then starting it and seeing what kind of PSI levels we get. just kind of to recap what's going on with this thing. So this was kind of like a quick and dirty challenge my brother gave himself during when we first shut down due to COVID. He wanted to see if he could supercharge his naturally aspirated Subaru Impreza 2.5RS and do it, within the 1 week or two we were home. Basically using stuff we had laying around, stuff that was available on like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, some things that you could get on eBay or whatever, but it was really just trying to source everything locally since everything was basically like shutting down. So it kind of all started, my brother sent me a picture of this Eaton M62 supercharger, which is originally from a Mercedes. So he sent me a picture of that, and I was like, oh, great. Nice paperweight that you bought. And then he sent me texted me some initial pictures of him trying to, eyeball how he was going to mount it and what was eventually going to become this bracket. And when I saw those pictures, I was like, oh yeah, this is never, ever going to run. So initially he basically mounted up the supercharger. His goal was to mount it up, try to align it with the pulleys without sacrificing the AC or the power steering or anything like that, and basically get a belt around it and see if he could just power it, right? Just spin it without doing any of the plumbing or anything like that. So that was the first piece, and he was able to do it, and supercharger was mounted and driven. And then came, trying to route all, the tubing. So he found some tubing sitting around and played with trying to weld to the cast aluminum OEM kind of fixtures on their flanges. And he had to cut and weld and cut and weld. He was playing with those angles. That's why those welds are as snotty and as ugly as they are. There was, he would actually weld it, didn't like the angles, would have to cut, change the angle, weld it again, build up some of the material from what was missing. And it's kind of funny, the first time he posted this in a Subaru forum, all the guys were going nuts about the welds. So it's kind of hilarious. But next step is going to be to fabricate pretty flanges there with the plumbing. He locally found a OEM Subaru intercooler and the blow-off valve. That's one of the things, one of the questions that comes up around this is, why are you running a blow-off valve on a supercharger? The thing is, with this style supercharger, there's multiple configuration options. One is with the throttle body before the supercharger, one's with the throttle body after the supercharger, which is what we did here. And there's a couple things going on, because you have to be sensitive to, if it was like a true roots style supercharger that's running all the time, the rotors get really hot. But because this is the Mercedes one, this is an electromagnetic clutch. So there's a couple reasons why this format, this little scenario actually works. And he's been driving it for well over a year, just kind of, daily. Yeah. And it works because, one, it's the electromagnetic clutch is set up to a vacuum operated switch. So it is not engaged all the time. And furthermore, he could just disable the whole system by cutting power to the whole thing. So he could drive around with the car basically being naturally aspirated without driving the actual rotors in the supercharger. But even when it's on, it's not producing boost the whole time. So there's no need for like a bypass valve, which these would normally have, to bleed off that boost. So what's happening is the switch engages the supercharger, and then because the throttle body is after the supercharger, the blow-off valve is what is blowing off the excess boost, and at that point the throttle switch is cutting the rotor, the clutch, and cutting the rotors anyway. So he's been driving it. Like I said, it's been working. The other kind of funny part of this kind of archaic piece was, how to address the tune, right? Or the fuel management. And we really did it, he did it rudimentary. He basically upgraded the fuel system. So he upgraded the fuel pump, got a fuel pressure regulator, which he mounted here. And that's one of the weird things that you don't really notice about this. He had to do a lot of moving around of stuff. So normally mounted there is like some of the evap components. And I think he put them back on the firewall. I think the ABS pump he had to slide over a little bit. So there's little tweaks that he did here and there to make room for everything. But basically the fuel system he put on there's new fuel rails, which you can see there. There's one of them and here's the other. So the fuel now comes from the pressure regulator and goes into a Y, and the two fuel rails are fed in parallel. Normally, here's the actual Y, so you can see it, right? So and then this goes to each fuel rail. Normally, the stock Subaru fuel system setup is the 4 fuel injectors are fed in series. And basically that creates a fuel pressure drop between the first fuel injector and the fourth, the one that's at the end of the line. So this gives you more consistent fuel, but ultimately he has the regulator so he could adjust. The other thing he did is, so he welded in a O2 sensor, which goes to an air fuel ratio gauge in the car. And using the gauge, we're able to kind of tweak the amount of fuel. It's not perfect, but if anything, it errs a little on the rich side to keep things cool, right? The big danger here would be running lean, which would, create heat and end up destroying the engine. So he played with a couple different fuel injectors, size fuel injectors that he got from a local guy. I think when he bought the fuel kit, the guy gave him some other fuel injectors. I want to say there was like an OEM ones. There was like Nissan injectors from like a 350Z, I think, or something like that. So he played with those, and once we got it running initially. And then the other piece to fine tune it is an old school Apexi Super AFC airflow converter, right? So this allows you to adjust parts of the map. So, like the low range, the high range, and the RPM, different areas in the RPM band. It gives you the ability to tweak the mixture at that point. And so far, this was enough to keep the car basically running well, where it's supposed to from an air fuel ratio point of view. There is a boost gauge mounted. With the original pulley, this car was only producing like 1 or 2 pounds of boost. So that's why he just wanted to get everything running and kind of sort it out from a reliability point of view. Just, it wasn't spitting belts or anything like that. So the next step was to eventually get around to ordering a pulley to see if we could get the boost numbers a little higher. Again, this is a naturally aspirated engine, so it won't, with the compression ratio and everything, it won't necessarily tolerate, a ton of boost. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what it's like. And again, if this whole thing grenades, the whole point anyway, the whole plan for this car is to turbo swap it anyway. And to my left, the turbo engine's already sitting over by the wall, along with a JDM transmission with the center diff, driver controlled center diff and everything. So again, this is just was a challenge to see if we could do it and see, and how well it worked. But that's really it. It's a matter of now we're just, we got the bigger pulley on, and we got to figure out how to address the AC bracket so we can get that AC belt back on, and finding or getting the correct size belt to mount the pulley and the supercharger. So right now, my brother's out at the parts store trying to get a 61-inch serpentine 5-rib belt. Okay, so the supercharger is now on.